to get on the road again, telling stories to our family and our friends. We can't wait to get on the road again. On the road again. We can't wait to get on the road again, telling stories to our friends. We can't wait to get on the road again.
Okay. Welcome to our monthly AAA podcast, Affinity, Allie, and Annette on the road to good storytelling with your hosts, Allie Spooner and Annette Morey.
Welcome. I'm Allie Spooner, and I write with Affinity with over 30, almost 40 published titles now. I touch on many genres from romance to paranormal. I have numerous series, and lately I've focused on teaching myself to write short stories and standalone books. I hope you enjoy our podcast and have an opportunity to meet some authors that are new to you or learn more about your favorites. We appreciate your support and invite you to visit Affinity Rainbow Publications to check out our books.
And I'm the co-host, Annette Morey, also an author with Affinity Rainbow Publications. Pretty sure I settled into a brand that includes a kind of a quirky, unconventional style of writing, which undoubtedly, well, I know it does give my publisher fits. After 30 published novels, I still feel like I have a lot to learn from others. That's why we invite other great authors like Caren, and hope that our guests help illuminate me to some of the tricks and techniques for writing sapphic books. Fortunately, I have a very small but loyal base of readers that help keep me writing.
Each month, we'll invite a special guest to join us as we discuss various topics of interest to writers and readers. We'll invite our guests to do a short reading and then follow with questions on the featured topic, while encouraging them to do at least one giveaway to our audience.
This month, I'm super excited. We're talking about books with a touch of mystical flair, which is kind of fun. We're very, very honored to have Caren Werlinger join us to discuss her wonderful books. I think she's going to talk about the books in the Little Island series, which I just read, which were absolutely fabulous. I am eagerly awaiting book number 4. And those 3 books are When the Stars Sang, Face the Wing, and The New Shore. We also know that Allie Spooner writes in many different subgenres, and her Cast Iron series has a special kind of mystical flair to it as well. In fact, when I was reading Caren's series, and also I've read obviously all of Allie's books, I love her stuff, I was taken by the similarities between the 2 series, because there's this whole sort of family focus, which was really kind of cool to read about. Anyways, her Cast Iron series has that mystical flair, and she's going to read from that. And I'm very excited because she's going to read from her new book, The Sky People. And we're very blessed to have both of them do a reading for us.
Following our podcast, we'll upload to a newly created YouTube channel and hope you consider subscribing so you never miss a future podcast.
So let me introduce Caren. She is a best-selling author who published her first award-winning novel, Looking Through Windows, in 2008. Since then, she's published 16 more novels, winning several more awards, influenced by a diverse array of authors, including Rummer Godden. Is that how you pronounce it? Rumor Godden. J.R. Tolkien, Ursula Le Guin, Marion Zimmer Bradley, Willa Cather, and the Bronte sisters. Of course, I know them. Caren writes literary fiction that features the struggles and joys of characters readers can identify with. Her stories cover a wide range of genres: historical fiction, contemporary drama, and fantasy, including the award-winning The Dragon Mage Saga, a fantasy trilogy set in ancient Ireland. She's lived in Virginia for 30 years, where she practices physical therapy, teaches anatomy, and lives with her wife and their canine fur children.
Thank you, Annette and Allie. It's an honor to be here with you today. I am really thrilled to be guesting here on your podcast and to be sharing a little bit more about my books with your listeners. I will be doing a short reading from the third and the latest book in the Little Island series called The New Shore. In this book, Kathleen Halloran, one of the main characters who has carried through from book to book to book, she has had to help take care of her mother, who is terminally ill, and that's in the blurb. I'm not giving away. There are no spoilers here. But her mother has recently passed away at this point in the book, but there's still a pall hanging over the house. There's just this darkness that has kind of settled over Kathleen and her mate, Molly. And in this scene, Siobhan, the island witch, is there to help them deal with this. So that's the scene, okay? I don't understand why we have to do this, Kathleen said irritably. The room is empty. We got rid of all the beds and furniture. It's been painted. It's just sitting empty. But Siobhan walked slowly around the bedroom, her hands up as if feeling for something. That's a good start, but not enough. She went to a large tote bag she'd brought with her and handed Molly 4 white pillar candles. Set these at the compass points, will you? Oh, and open the window all the way. Molly stood for a moment, orienting herself before placing the candles on the floor and then shoving the sash as high as it would go. To Kathleen, Siobhan handed several pieces of wood. Some were twisted and gnarled, others looked like ordinary branches. What are these for? Kathleen asked. Tree magic. Siobhan held up one of the branches. This is hawthorn, and these, she picked up 2 others, are alder and blackthorn. They help in cleansing and protection. What about this one? Kathleen turned over another gnarled piece of wood in her hand. It looks like driftwood. It is. Siobhan met her eyes. Driftwood is a merging of earth and water, important for this particular cleansing, I think. Kathleen blinked and lowered her eyes. Where do you want these? Place them between the candles in a large circle. I'll lay out the hemlock and yew. Molly straightened. Aren't those poisonous? They are, but they've powerful magic as well. Siobhan went to the door where Blossom lay in the hall watching everything. I need to close the door. Do you want to be in or out? He scrambled into the room, crouching in the corner. Siobhan closed the door, and when everything was laid out, they stepped into the circle. She spread her arms, spinning slowly in place, and the candles ignited. Close your eyes, Siobhan commanded. She murmured words that Kathleen couldn't make out, but they didn't sound like English. A whisper of air moved through the room, swirling around them. Siobhan stepped away, and Kathleen opened her eyes to see her holding a small bundle of bound herbs. She held it to one of the candles until it began to smoke, and then she walked around the interior of their circle, waving the thing to spread the smoke. When she completed her circle, she placed it in a small pewter bowl she'd set in the center. Smoke continued to billow into the room until a haze hung over everything. A peaceful death is beautiful, quiet, a last breath that bridges the journey a soul makes from one plane to a first breath in another, like stepping through a door. Siobhan's voice was soothing, hypnotic. But this room, this house, has been tied to a death that was not peaceful. That kind of death leaves an imprint in this realm, like a shadow of something cold and heavy. That ore had to have been imbued with everything Brian was feeling and thinking as his life ended. His terror, his regret, and by Christine clinging to it, she clung also to all of those negative emotions. Siobhan raised her face skyward. They fill this room. They must be forced to move on, or the negative energy they are intertwined with will continue to feed on those it comes in contact with. As if someone had opened the door, the smoke began to swirl and writhe about, a living thing, angry and agitated. We free you, Brian, and you, Christine, of any last anchors that tie you to this realm. Go, be finally at peace. Obeying her command, the undulating smoke began to swirl faster. Kathleen felt a brush of air against her cheek, and strands of Molly's hair blew across her forehead. Siobhan swept her arms toward the open window. With an audible sigh, the smoke drifted through and out. Siobhan closed the window and turned to them. Molly, her voice trembling, asked, "What in the world was that?" That, said Siobhan, was the last of the negative energy left behind. It tends to linger, looking for something to latch onto, to feed on. She took Kathleen's hand between hers. Now your house is your own.
All right.
Awesome. That was so great. Many years ago, I had a good friend of mine who worked, she was actually the administrative secretary, but she was such a character. She would have these interesting shaped glasses that she would wear, hearts and diamonds and all kinds of interesting things. And she was just an interesting person. And she was, I can't remember what tribe, part of First Nations, but she was a high up magical and I'm not really sure what the title was, but anyways, so she came and we bought all these crystals and she came and blessed our house, and did the smudge stick and all the whole, it was this whole ritual. It was really absolutely fascinating. But she was just this cool person. So I am actually familiar with getting rid of bad energy and blessing houses and all of that. That really rung true from my experience. I don't know, Allie, have you ever had anybody bless your house or smudge your house or do any of those kind of things? Have you?
We've had it saged a few times. Yeah.
Oh, good. And Caren, have you had a personal experience with that? Somebody coming to?
I have not. No, and I completely did that based just on research and imagination. So to experience it sometime.
Yeah, you should. It was a fascinating ritual that she did. It was interesting to watch. Anyway, so Allie, are you ready for your little snippet for us?
I am actually. I'm reading from the book that's released today. It's the fourth book in the Cast Iron series called The Sky People. Eli and Whit are the two main characters, and Whit has finally met her father. She never knew the existence of her father until recently, and he has basically dropped a bombshell on them. After their marriage and after the honeymoon, Whit and Eli decided that they were going to have a baby together. So they painstakingly went through profiles and picked out the same individual. And Whit's father has informed her that the individual that is going to be their donor is also a star child, and that they would have twins, which was a shock to everybody. So these are two snippets from a couple of the chapters in the book that covers a little bit more of the uniqueness of the babies.
Hey, Allie, before you start the reading, I know what a star child is, but I'm not sure if the rest of the readers might not know.
Well, First Nations have a variety of uses for the word or the term star child. It can be something that the sky people or individuals that the Native Americans thought came from the sky, whether they were gods, whether they were spirits, whether, aliens, whatever. In this book, I use sky people as something a little bit different. Come to find out, they're not from a different planet. They're from a different time period or dimension in today's Earth. So that's where her father comes into the picture, and the term sky people or sky child are derived from. Wit, being half human and half sky child, or half sky people, is considered a sky child. And the two babies will also be considered sky children. Does that explain it? Okay. All right, here we go. Eli caressed Whit's baby bump with her fingertips. That tickles. What tickles? She asked Whit. What do you mean? Whit looked confused. Did you just not say that tickles? Eli looked at Whit. No, it wasn't me, Whit replied. Eli's eyes grew wide as her hand caressed Whit's stomach. She heard giggling in her head. What tickles? You running your fingers across us, a tiny voice answered. What the heck? Eli looked up at Whit, shocked. Eli laid her head on Whit's stomach. Zach and Mackenzie, is that you? Yes, duh, a voice answered, but we prefer Zach and Mac. Are you hearing this? Eli asked Whit. Whit nodded her head. Zach and Mac it is, then. Thanks, Mommy, a tiny female voice answered. You're welcome, Mac. How long have you two been listening to us? Eli asked. Since yesterday, Da, Zach answered. When we heard our names being called, it woke us. Eli shook her head to clear the cobwebs from her brain. Seriously? Yes, Zach repeated. Eli lowered her head and kissed Whit's stomach. Good morning, my babies. Good morning, Da, Zach answered. Why Da? Whit asked. Does it offend you? Mac answered. No, not at all, Eli said. She smiled at Whit in disbelief. We have a mommy who carries us and a Da to protect us. Would you rather we call you anything else? Absolutely not. Da is perfect, Eli told them. Da, will you feed Mommy then? We're hungry, Zach said. What are we eating today? Eli asked. I think she calls it French toast, Mac replied. I'm on my way to the kitchen, Eli said, climbing from the bed. I'll get breakfast started, Mommy. I've got to empty my bladder from where these two have been using it for a punching bag, and I'll be right down, Whit answered. Sorry, Mommy. It's starting to get a little cramped in here, Zach answered. If you keep growing, you won't fit much longer, Whit said as she waddled toward the bathroom. You will be meeting us soon, Mac replied. We are ready to see you, Da, and our cousin Mitch. He is already crazy about you, and you haven't been born yet, Whit answered. We can feel the love you share, Mac said. He would be jealous if he knew we could talk to you, Whit said. He is so excited to have cousins. We could talk to him through you, Zach said. I don't think we're ready for that just yet. Mitch and Mark know much about my background, but don't know you're a second generation for star children. I think it's best to keep that secret for now. Yes, Mommy, Zach answered. We'll sleep now so you can enjoy your meal. Whit slipped on a robe and joined Eli in the kitchen. Eli turned to her with a massive smile on her face. Can you believe what just happened? No, but I think it's pretty awesome. The twins are napping while we eat, she told Eli. I'm glad you can hear them. I thought I was losing my mind for a minute. I know your father said this would possibly happen, but wow, just wow. I have a feeling their awakening will trigger a visit from him soon. I'm sure he has much to say to them. I wouldn't be surprised either. Eli plated 2 slices of French toast and handed them to Whit. Apple juice? Please, Whit answered. Are you not eating with me? I'm too excited to eat. I have some coffee, though. Do you have a busy day planned? I do now. I will buckle down and finish sanding the wood for the cribs. I have a feeling the twins will arrive ahead of schedule. Mark and I can assemble them this weekend, and I can stand them next week. I guess I need to order the mattresses and a mat pad for the changing table, Whit said. Can you think of anything else we haven't planned for? I don't know if we will need them, but what about rocking chairs in case they get colic? I don't think they will, but rocking chairs will be nice to have in the living room. I don't think they will fit anywhere else. What about the landing at the top of the stairs? It's big enough and will be a quiet area, Eli suggested. 2 weeks later, Eli and Whit were relaxed on the couch, preparing to go upstairs for the evening. Whit felt a twinge of muscles in her lower belly. Da, Mommy, it's time, Zach said. What? Eli said, jumping off the couch. It's time, Zach repeated. There is time to drive slow, he reminded Eli. We will arrive in the morning. Okay, you relax here while I pull the truck up to the steps, Eli said. Eli? Yes. Whit reached for her and pulled her in for a kiss. Relax. We've got this. Eli took a deep breath. Yes, we do. Will you call Mitch and tell them we're headed to the hospital? I'm on it, Whit said, and picked up her phone. Hello, Mitch answered with a groggy voice. Are you already in bed? Whit teased. Wait, what? Is everything okay? He immediately sprang to life. I wanted to let you and your dad know we are heading to the hospital. I will probably be in labor most of the night, so there's no rush to sit and wait. Will you feed the animals in the morning and come then? Yes, no problem. I'll call Dad. Is Eli okay to drive? I can drive you. Eli will be fine, Mitch, but thanks for offering. I'll see you in the morning. Love you. I love you too. Mitch hung up and called his dad. They're going to the hospital. Whit said to feed up and come in the morning. She sounded pretty calm for someone about to give birth, Mitch said. How was Eli? Whit says she's good and can drive them safely. The hell with waiting until the morning. Shower and get dressed. I'll call Carol and Julia and ask them to feed the animals in the morning. We can drop Cruz at their house when we leave. Sounds good. Oh, and son, dress comfortably. It could be a long night. On it, Dad, Mitch said. I'll see you soon. Eli's hands trembled as she placed the key in the ignition. Get a grip, she growled at herself and let out a slow, deep breath. She pulled the truck up near the steps and jogged inside for Whit. Cruz was lying on the couch beside her with her head in Whit's lap. When you see us next, the babies will be with us, Whit said, stroking her head. Mitch will come in the morning to feed you. Cruz climbed down from the couch when Whit stood, and Eli escorted her from the house. We'll be back soon, she promised Cruz, and closed the door. After buckling Whit in her seat, she asked, is there anything else you need? Whit nodded with a smile. A kiss. Eli leaned in and kissed her sweetly. Let's roll. Breathe, Da. Mommy's the one having babies, Zach teased to lighten the mood in the truck. Eli reached over and covered Whit's hand on her stomach. I am breathing, she chuckled. Have you given thought to who arrives first? Whoever it is will be the firstborn and will always be the older sibling. Zach will be the first and will always be my protector, Mac replied. I like that answer, Eli said. I'm so excited to finally get to see you. As we are, Zach replied. We can't wait to be in your arms. Hey, what am I, chopped liver? I've carried you all these months, Whit teased. Yours will be the first face we see, Mommy, Zach answered. Eli returned her hand to the steering wheel and carefully drove to the hospital. When the nurse wheeled Whit into the birthing room, Eli turned to Whit. I'll be right back once I park the truck. Don't worry. We'll get Whit set up in a comfortable room. Your doctor's been notified and he's on his way in, the nurse told him. So that's introducing Mac and Zach.
I loved them. I loved the fact that they could talk while still in the womb. That was such a cool concept. I would imagine that parents all around the world would wish that their children could talk before they actually can talk. Sometimes when they cry and they don't know what they're crying about.
Right, absolutely.
Crying about. Anyways, okay, so everyone knows I make up words. So why not subgenres? So I made this subgenre on Mystical Flair. How's that? I'm not sure it's an actual true subgenre, but it seemed like both of your books somewhat fit into that unique character category. So I'm wondering what Mystical Flair means to you. I'll start with you, Caren, and then Allie, I'd love to hear what that might mean to you as well.
I think for me, and I like the term, by the way, if it isn't an official subgenre, it should be.
Absolutely.
But introducing mysticism or touches of magic into my books, I think reflects my desire to believe that magic is real. I don't know for sure that it is, but I don't know that it isn't. And there have been times in my life when I've felt like things have happened that kind of felt as if somebody was watching over me or kind of nudging things or guiding things along so that they either protected me or helped my life move in a certain direction. And you could chalk it up to an active imagination, I guess, but I like to think that is the kind of intervention that a lot of us have experienced, and why not introduce that into books too?
Absolutely. And I agree, and it's hard to follow that kind of an answer, but it's just giving the reader something a little bit different to think about, that it's not just always the same type of romance or same type of story. You throw a little hook in there, so to speak, and I think it's definitely a stretch on my imagination to think of talking twins, but hey, it's different.
Yeah. No, I agree. In fact, I love books that don't necessarily follow the traditional route, just because those are the ones that I actually remember more than others. I'll always remember twins talking in the womb. That will be something that will stick out versus girl meets girl, fall in love, then there are complications, and then they get back, I mean, the same, they blend together after a while, whereas these kinds of books don't blend together. As I was reading, I think it was the first book, Caren, in your series, and I mean, I know you have a sense of humor because you'll put little zingers in every once in a while in Facebook, and I'll go, God, she's funny. But I didn't realize that there were actually some laugh out loud moments in your books, and I was like, gosh, this all doesn't really fall into the humor category, but dang, there's some funny parts in here. I don't know if you had the same sort of.
I'm not a funny person. I was never like the class clown, and I'm mystified by what most people think of as comedies. But the characters of Louisa and Olivia in that book, they cracked me up. And they helped kind of roll that part along, it was a lot of fun to just go with that.
Yeah, it was very funny and a really pleasant surprise. I've been reading I've been on a Robin Alexander binge, and she's just so funny. Her books are so funny. They just crack me up. But I hadn't expected that from your books, because some of your other books have a little bit more of a drama flair to them, more serious. And this one had that lightheartedness that was like, wow, this is like a little nice little treat,
Yeah.
Anyways, where did that idea of Little Sister Island books come from? I thought it was kind of fascinating. I know of, I think there are some places in other countries where you have this 99-year sort of where you can't actually buy property, but I don't think they do it to keep. Well, I mean, they might. I think they do it to keep the developers out, but not to the same extent. I thought that was a very fascinating concept. And I thought to myself, I want to live there. I mean, I could totally do that.
Yeah, I would love to live on an island like Little Sister. I'm very much an introvert. My wife is not, and she's not as sold on the idea as I am. But yeah, I've watched a lot of changes happen. My wife and I, for the whole time we've been together, so 30 plus years, we've gone to the Outer Banks on a pretty much yearly basis. And over the years, we've watched the influx of developers and the bigger and bigger houses, and the people who lived there not being able to afford to live there anymore. So in a little way, even though it's not an island, that Outer Banks experience really kind of helped color my view for Little Sister, and just knowing what the tendency is for outsiders to come and buy up land and close off their section of beach and make it private and theirs only, and that kind of thing. And I wanted the blend of the first one's indigenous culture and the Celtic pieces that the Irish shipwreck survivors brought with them to kind of be blended together into a completely unique society that's not fully indigenous and not fully Celtic anymore, but that has a reverence for nature. And it just made sense to me that there's just no way indigenous people would never have chopped up land and said, I have this chunk of it. But the Irish, coming from a history of being unable to own land and having to work as itinerant or tenant farmers for wealthy, mostly British landowners, they would have, I think at first, craved the idea of owning land, but then maybe seen the wisdom of it being kind of more communal property. So it's just a lot of fun to play with those concepts and how they were going to be formalized in terms of the way the islanders set up their charter, the way they set up who is and isn't allowed to live there. So unfortunately, I probably would not be allowed, but I really would wish it were real.
I know. Yeah.
Well, I'll admit, I was on the internet Googling this. Is there really a Little Sister Island? I know.
Yeah, there are places that have this sort of where you can't purchase it, usually to keep honestly, to keep Americans from gobbling up shorelines of Mexico and some of those other areas.
Yeah.
Because we've looked at moving to Mexico, especially considering the possibility of what might happen in 2024. It scares the bejeebies out of us. And we're like, we really do not want to be here if it's going to get so much more difficult for us. So how about your cast iron series? I know the first book was that set things up, in terms of the lottery, and then it just kind of took off. Where did that idea come from?
My younger brother and I, over a Thanksgiving weekend, we're just sitting around just chewing the fat, and we have both always longed to have a home place back in North Carolina, where my father's family came from. And we, just started saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to have a forge, we're going to have this, we're going to have gardens, yada, yada, yada. So it just kept grinding in the back of my head. And it's like, okay, this is a book. I'm going to use his family as my fictional family. And his oldest, Chaz, is Mitch in my book. And he and I are basically, he's 22 years old, but he'll still tell you that this old lady is his best friend. So, we talk several times a week, and it's just like, I'm going to use him. And some of the things that they go through as teenage boys are in this book, and the young man that he grows into is very much like what he has done now that he's in his early 20s. So that's basically where this series came from.
Yeah. Well, you can definitely tell how much you love your nephews and how you represent them. So I know you both of you write romances, and we all know romance is queen. But both of you also, your books tend to fall into other categories that aren't the sort of contemporary fiction, but more drama. Some of them are a little bit more serious, probably fall more into the lesbian fiction category. And it's definitely the reason why I love both of your work, because it doesn't necessarily follow that traditional trope, and it sets itself apart from all the other books that feel similar after a while. Do you think that makes it harder or easier to sell? Like, is that your brand and it makes it easier to sell? Or do you think it's just difficult to go outside of that typical contemporary romance trope? Both, either one of you, whoever wants to answer first.
I think in the beginning, with the first one or two books, because romance is so heavy in terms of the percentage of lesfic that is sold, it was hard to make inroads. And then, as you noted, my books, I try to write light. I try to write fluffy stuff, and it just doesn't stay fluffy. Because life happens, things intrude on a relationship. People are weighed down sometimes by family issues or illnesses or injuries or work, or name one of a gazillion different things that happen to us, and relationships have to navigate that, and people have to figure out how to either go with the flow or make adjustments to their expectations or change how they look at someone they love. And that, to me, is so much richer, a ground to mine for ideas. And I'm not a dark natured person, but again, serious stuff happens. I will say that even though all of my books involve a relationship, I probably would call them love stories rather than romances, because there is not always a happy ending to my novels, but there's always a hopeful ending. So it's a different kind of HEA, a hopeful ever after, perhaps, rather than a happy ever after.
Yeah.
And I'm with Caren. I'm not your typical romance person. I can't even really consider myself a romance writer. there is some trickle of romance in there just because that's what readers enjoy reading. You know, I've found in the cast iron series that they have the readers have seemed to enjoy, you know, following this family along. And it's not just the blood family, it's the found family, you know, from the different members of the community that, you know, have just combined to make the Cast Iron Farm series what it is. You know, and there's, you know, while there is definitely a loving relationship, you know, I don't see it primarily as a romance. It's more of an adventure and, you know, everyday life type kind of stuff, not just something that, you know, you expect to happen in your typical romance trope.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I probably don't. I have written contemporary romance, but it's the same thing. It's hard for me. I always want to stick in a serious issue here or there, or I always want to quirk it up, or you know, I just can't stick with a traditional romance. And but that's what sells. But it seems like both of you have found an audience for your books. It's not like you're struggling, right, to find readers who enjoy your stuff. So that gives me hope.
I think that's true now with more books. People kind of have a bit more of a feeling of what to expect from my novels. And Allie, you're probably finding the same kind of thing, that even though some of them tackle some pretty serious or thought-provoking topics, that they might not want a steady diet of what I write, but they know what to expect now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Or
you've
just-
certainly gotten enough acclaim for your books too, and so that helps.
For a good change of pace, you know,
Yeah.
from the norm, you know, and then I think it gives us a little bit more license to be more creative and not have to think that it has to be all erotic or romance, or, you know, we can plug things in that are interesting to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, the more books you write, the more you can do that. You have that ability to say, you know, I'm not gonna just write to fill whatever or something that's going to market best.
Yeah.
So what do you think was the most challenging thing about writing mystical flair novels for you?
I think for me, the trickiest part of introducing magical elements or mystical elements is maybe finding a balance where it's not overdone to the point where people are kind of putting this purely in the fantasy shelf, but kind of maybe looking around and thinking, I wonder, you know, could something like that actually be out there? Could something like that happen in my life? And if you can keep it kind of real, but just with a touch of mysticism, I think to me that's the perfect balance.
Yeah. And, you know, the talking twins idea, you know, it's certainly a gamble for me. You know, I think it's kind of far out there, but I think if they give them a chance, the twins are really going to grow on them. Not so much in this book as in the next. So, you know, hopefully they'll still give me a little bit of creative license to take it where I think it needs to go.
I hope so. I mean, I thought that was brilliant myself personally. And I kind of like, I think, people who write fantasy and not ones that I would call flair, or sometimes I've called them sci-fi light or fantasy light or whatever. That's got to be so hard to create that world building and all of that gets so complicated. I really like this sort of concept of mystical flair, where like you said, there's lots of realism, and then you just kind of fold in these magical, mystical elements. To me, that's nice. It's nice to read that, and it's easy to read. Sometimes some of the really complicated sci-fi or fantasy books, they they have their own set of language and everything that gets so complicated. It's harder to read. It's not as like, oh, this is a relaxing read where I can read this. I have to go back and go, okay, what does that mean? Or, I have to go back to their definitions or whatever that sometimes they put in their books. Anyways.
And I think both of our styles of the books that we read from today touch upon indigenous people and Celtic people.
Yes, that too. Yeah.
And I don't think that's a group of people that are included in a lot of books, especially romance books.
That's true. Yeah.
But there are people who've maintained more of a sense of the natural world. And I mean, just watching a seed unfurl into a sprout and then a flower. I mean, how is that not magic? Nature is magic. And I think that's one thing that bringing in indigenous and Celtic aspects to the story makes it a little bit easier to connect in that way too.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. Agreed. So how do you build tension in a story without giving up too much too soon?
That is not an easy thing to do by any means. And you don't want to stretch a tension part of a story arc too long, because people almost forget where the story was going or whatever.
Right.
One of the most complimentary things I've gotten from some of the reviews of my books is when readers or reviewers say that there were so many threads in a particular story that they were interested in following each one, but they didn't see how I was going to be able to tie them all together by the end of the story, and that I was able to do that in a very satisfying way for them. And that to me is a huge, huge compliment, because sometimes when I'm writing, I don't even realize how many balls I'm juggling, and then, but in my head, kind of, they're all intertwined. It's like they're the pieces of a tapestry, and I know what the picture is going to look like at the end, even if it isn't visible until the last thread is in there.
Right. Allie, what about you?
Well, in this series in particular, in the first book, we find this crystal cave, and there's these beautiful blue crystals in the wall and everything. And it's kind of a thread throughout. It's not really tension, but it's just little hints of, what really is going to occur in the future books. The cave and the crystals actually turn out to be an energy source for Wit's father's vehicle to travel through time, and it's also got healing properties, just different things that, hopefully by the end of the next book, everything will be tied together in a nice, pretty bow.
Good. You have answered some of it, though, as when you started it off, I was like, oh, I want to know what that's about. So that builds that tension where you want to flip to the next page because you want to know what is going to happen next. Yeah. It's good. You both did it very well because you kept me interested to the very end. What kind of conflicts and complications are your favorite? Super angsty, low angst? What's your preference? What do you tend to gravitate toward?
I think my books probably bear out that I'm kind of more on the angsty end of the spectrum if that's a continuum. I probably tend to veer toward more the angstier kinds of things. And again, I think part of that is 30 plus years as a physical therapist. I've seen people have to deal with some really serious life-altering injuries, illnesses. I just recently was going through some old boxes, and I found my first year as a physical therapist, a nurse, an RN, was on her way to work at a nearby hospital, not my hospital. She was broadsided. It was a horrible accident, tremendous traumatic brain injury. She was never going to be able to work as a nurse again. Mm-hmm. And she was my patient, but I would go up after work and just sit with her, not therapeutic time, but just talking time. Mm-hmm. And she wrote me a letter that I just came across after 30 some years. And, you know, those kinds of things. And it's not that every book has to be full of doom and gloom or anything like that, but it kind of back to that thing of life happens in a second. Her entire life was changed and nothing was ever going to be the same. And it's like that for a lot of us. I mean, so if we call that angst, I guess that's the kind of thing I like to introduce to my books, just because it forces you again to look at life a little bit differently, look at your loved ones or your friends a little bit differently, and maybe value them a little bit more, remember to tell them how you feel about them, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm super angsty. I try to keep it fairly low key. You know, every book has got a little bit of angst in it, but it's not an overwhelming part of the story. You know, I use writing as a bit of escape for me, because I think there's plenty of angst going on in our world today, and you know, I want to kind of take a break and get away from that for a bit.
One thing I appreciate about both of your styles is there's not what I call manufactured angst, like, oh, got to have a conflict. Let's create something that isn't a very realist, that usually doesn't come to me as very realistic conflict or angst. It's like, well, why would somebody get so upset about X? You know, I was like, well, because we need a conflict. Okay, this is about the time you're going to get it. So here we go. Let's manufacture something.
Yeah, you're through into the book and there's no angst yet. Well, you know, when's it going to come? Yeah.
I'm sorry, Caren. Yeah.
You definitely get the feeling for some books that it was like, okay, it's time. You're at 75 or 80%, and that bad thing hasn't happened yet. So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's your go-to source for information with a mystical component to it? I know that you said you did some research for the cleansing. What's your primary go-to source for research?
There are a couple of websites I've bookmarked for Celtic mythology and for the Celtic traditions of celebrating the various feasts and things. With the indigenous stuff, I tended to stay away from any specific tribal traditions, or even not naming a tribe. I mean, because Maine actually has several indigenous tribes, and I didn't want to have to try to pick one as the people who settled on the Big and Little Sister Islands. It might not even have been just one tribe. It might have been have been blended.
Sure.
So I had some license there to kind of leave that a little more open-ended.
Right.
And probably, I'm guessing, you know, I think when there's that fine line of danger of cultural appropriation and, you know, getting into that. So that was probably a smart move. Allie, what about you?
I'm a big TV geek when it comes to like shows like Ancient Aliens and the History Channel. And, you know, if there's anything on, you know, time travel or Bigfoot even, you know, I'm all into that. So, you know, it's just like it helps spur some of my creativity sometimes.
Wow. Okay, good. All right, Allie, we all know you're a pantster like me. How about you, Caren? Are you a pantster or a plotter or somewhere in between?
I definitely started out writing as a total pantser. I mean, sometimes there are a couple of my early books that started with nothing more than an image. Like my I guess the first novel I published under my own imprint was Miserere, and it was totally based on my memory of a house we looked at. My dad was being transferred and we were having to move. I was probably about 9 years old, and we looked at this old farmhouse with broken out windows and knee-high grass, but it had a barn, and I could have had a horse, and I wanted that house so badly, and my parents didn't get it. But anyway, that house stayed in my memory all those years, and that was kind of the jumping off point for an entire story. It's like, what kind of stories could that house tell? So I had no idea where it was going at the time. When I wrote the Dragon Mage saga, And there may be more books coming with that, but that was definitely planned as a trilogy. And for the first time, I had to outline because I knew that certain story elements had to be consistent through 3 books. And there was just no way to do that without outlining. And so now I'm a little bit more in between. I still tend to be primarily a pantser, but I've got a little bit more of an idea ahead of time of where a story's going.
Yeah.
Will there be more of the Little Sister Island?
I'm working on number 4 right now.
Good, good. About 10 more, right?
Oh, I don't know. We'll see.
I really, really enjoyed that series. So
Yeah, it was fun. I enjoy series books, you know, because you can follow the characters and you get to know them. And sometimes, though, what's hard about following series for me is that I'll read a series and then go to something else. So that's why sometimes I like when the series is complete, then I can just binge it all at once rather than otherwise I go back and I try to remember. And sometimes my memory is not so good.
yeah.
Well, I can tell you, and Allie, you're probably experiencing the same thing. One of the challenges of writing a series is remembering all of the details yourself, because
Oh yeah.
readers will remember. And if you mess one up, they will let you know about it. So you've got to be really careful. And that's another reason I've had to outline a little bit more, is just because I've had to go back and create like a timeline of what happened from the beginning of, you know, the first book when the star sang through now 3 books. And as I'm into the 4th, I've got to, okay, how the babies that were born, you know, the little ones, what age would they be now? Things like that. So it's stuff like that you got to keep track.
Yeah, I've got a Annette Moore that keeps me on track with that. She busts me out from my timeline because in this book or in the next one, I really botched it, and it's like, this can't happen. They can't be that old that quickly, and then nobody else is aged. It's like, all right, you got me on that one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I'm the same, you know, you'll catch stuff. We read each other's, but I used to use a lot of beta readers. I don't know if you use a lot of beta readers or not. I used to use a lot. Now I wanted to get these books out relatively quickly, so I stopped using beta readers. Instead, Allie's my beta reader, and I'm a beta reader for her, and she'll catch stuff. But I find the hardest process is the editing process, because I'm such a pantser that I don't remember anything. I don't remember their hair color sometimes, or their eye color, and I have to go back and I have to reread a bunch of things to make things work. And like you said, I don't outline before, but then after I go back through it, I'm like, okay, so now I need to start. What I do is I'll tag it in the book. I'll say, comment, here's November, whatever, 1997 or whatever, and try to tag it so the timeline then works, because otherwise I'll get it wrong. I know I will.
It's easy to do. And I'm one of those who tends to kind of reread, not everything, obviously, you never get anywhere, but go back maybe a couple of pages and reread as I start writing again, just to try and maintain a consistent voice. But when I do my self edit before the book does go off to, and I'm down to just 2 beta readers and my editor now too. I use track changes for myself, so that if there are things that I know I need to make note of in terms of a date or something specific that happened, I can follow along and make sure I'm consistent with that.
Exactly. Yeah. I'll highlight something and go, gosh, I know. Or if when I'm reading it, and rereading it, because I go through it like 5 or 6 times before it even goes to Allie or editors or whatever. And I will highlight something because I remembered reading it the time through before and going, oh, I can't remember if this is 10 years or 6 years, or I better highlight this and go back and double check on it. So, yeah. Yeah, it's, but you know, the nice thing about being a pantser is that it helps to keep your readers on their toes as well, because you never know what's going to happen, and that makes it more exciting, in my opinion. is
Yeah.
when I never know what's going to happen. So I'm sure the readers don't know what's going to happen. So anyways.
Yeah. The one time that I did try to plot something out in my early years, I started off great, and by the time I got to the second chapter, I was totally off course. But being a pastor gives you that freedom to do what you feel like needs to be done for that person or that character or that part of the story. So, it's just like just throw the whole plotting out the window.
Besides your Three Sisters trilogy and the latest one there, that wasn't your latest book that's come out though. What's your latest book, Caren, that's just come out?
Gosh, when you get to a certain point, you have to double check yourself.
I know.
I think this might have been the newest one. Hang on just a second. Yeah, the one before this was one of my very first books I actually wrote, but it wasn't the first one I published, was In This Small Spot. It's set in a contemplative monastery of nuns. A woman enters a monastery, and that's the primary setting for that book. And it was a book that was very personal to me, and it meant a lot to be able to write that story, but it needed a follow-up. And it's, I guess, kind of a sequel, even though it's several years later in terms of the writing of it. It picks up about 5 years after that story ended. And that book was An Unlit Candle. And so that was the second to last, but The New Shore is my most recent book.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I thought something else was either coming out or had just come out that was not part of the Three Sisters series. And I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that because for some reason I thought I read something.
Yeah, it probably was An Unlit Candle, but that was next to last in terms of
technology. Okay, well, good. All right. And we know that Allie, your book, Sky People, is your most recent, and that just came out today, right?
Right. It was on pre-order, but it's live everywhere today.
So I encourage everybody to get both books. I've read them both, love them both. Actually, get both series, get the whole series, because it's more fun when you read the series and you get to know the characters as they go along. Is there anything else, Caren, that you'd like to share with the audience out there about your work, books?
No, I mean, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really, really appreciate you guys having me on to be part of this. And I hope listeners enjoy this conversation as much as I've enjoyed having it.
Great, perfect. If anybody wants to leave comments or questions for either Caren or Allie, and I know Allie, what we generally do is we'll pick a name, and they can get your latest Sky People book, and I will usually give people a little while, a week or so, to leave questions or comments when we post these videos out there. So don't forget to check out our YouTube channel and subscribe. And then next month, we think we will be discussing heart-wrenching sapphic drama, but we haven't quite set that up yet. Any last comments, Allie or Caren?
Yeah. Caren, I appreciate you joining us, and keep writing the series. I really, really enjoyed it. I look forward to it.
Agreed. Love your work. Thank you so much for joining us, Caren.